Does anyone want to get water or anything you need? Is this straight?
Good evening, everybody. My name is Earl Fleury. I'm a member of the Brooklyn Island chapter of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. Welcome to our Real Talk series that we're having as we approach the new year of newness in American politics. I would like our moderators for agreeing to provide us with a platform to make sure that we're providing our communities the best that we can to make sure we know how to navigate these times. And I would like to thank all our panelists for being here tonight. I turn it over to Laura Harden, who was our moderator for the evening. And thank you again for having us.
Great. Thank you, Earl. Happy New Year, everyone. I'm really excited to be here tonight with this distinguished panel. First, let me thank the Brooklyn, Long Island alumni chapter of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated. They have been on the cutting edge for the last 4 years of hosting and facilitating opportunity. Giving us opportunities to facilitate these important conversations about what is happening politically with this nation. So we are now 6 days from the celebration of Dr. King's birthday and the inauguration of this new administration and a returning president. Today, Governor Hochul from New York gave her State of the State address, highlighting her initiatives for this upcoming year. California is still ablaze, with Altadena, the historic Black community, taking huge hits. And we also are seeing the beginning of the confirmations of the new administration's appointees, which have been pretty much contentious and a prime example of why DEI is necessary. Tonight, we're here to have a conversation entitled Political Satisfaction or Buyer's Remorse, How to Prepare for the Next Evolution of U.S. Politics in the 21st Century. And we have four distinguished members here who will participate. The first is Mrs. Alika Ampry Samuel, my sans, and a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated in Soror. Alika has over 25 years of public service with experience in housing and community development, with a career rooted in advocacy, leadership, and electoral politics. A former elected official, was appointed by President Joe Biden to be the regional administrator at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, overseeing the states of New York and New Jersey. Joining us is Dr. Robert Barnes, a member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, who has a long prestigious career and is currently an instructor in the College of Social Sciences in the City Colleges of Chicago. We have Mr. Glenn Murray, who has worked in the payments industry for over 20 years and currently serves as Chief Strategy Officer at DreamFi, a financial advocacy platform launching this fall. And he is dedicated to helping underserved individuals achieve economic success via banking and other financial products. And finally, we have our sans and a member of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated, Dr. Michael Hannon. And I love how Michael describes himself. He is a Black man, a husband, and a father who happens to be a counselor, professor, and author. Dr. Hannon is an associate professor at Montclair State University, where he teaches in the counseling program to prepare counselors to treat clients in educational and community settings. The way we're going to work tonight is I'll begin with asking each panelist to give us some overview around what they think we have to look forward to or what we should be prepared for with this incoming administration as it prepares to their particular subject matter. And then we will move on to discussing strategies for us to be successful in the upcoming political atmosphere. So I will kick it off with Alika, Mrs. Alika Ampry Samuel. Would you like to start?
All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much. We just celebrated our Founders Day yesterday, and shout out to the brothers of Kappa Alpha Psi. Thank you so much. So just jumping right into it, we know what we're about to get into. We already know, right? We saw a little bit of it 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and I say take that and put it on steroids. What I think what we need to focus on is being bold and not necessarily worried about like political correctness. Even within our own organizations, there's some things we can say, some things we can't say, certain places we can't wear our nail to. But I think people need to see the Amelia. People need to see us. People need to know what we're thinking, how we feeling. And so I really do just truly believe that we need to look at where we are in the world, society, who we are as a people, and just be ready to speak boldly and move in the way that we've never moved before. And I'll stop there.
Great. Thank you. Dr. Barnes, I'm going to hand it over to you. I'm interested to hear your take on what we see or what we can expect to see with the education, law enforcement, and
Okay.
conversation.
Amen. Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'd like to thank the forum for allowing me to share some insight into these issues. The question that I addressed that I believe concerns us most is the, I guess, the the prophetic statement that was given by the incoming president that he would be attempting to dismantle the Department of Education, which is a cabinet position um, in our the administration of every president, and this should send off alarms to all of us, um, people of color, and not just people of color, but every person in this nation that has attended a public institution. Um, and so when we hear these warning shots, and I think that's one way we should look at it. It's a warning shot being given by him. We need to think about the consequences associated with the removal of the Department of Education and the elements that basically support people of color through the Department of Education, such as Title One, Title Three, um, and the McKinney-Vento Act. I want to first, and it's my prayer that we will, uh, this forum will be presented to laity as well as the educated. So I first kind of want to, and let me know if there's a time constraint. I first want to kind of identify what the Department of Education does for those that aren't familiar. And then we want to look, I specifically want to identify or define Title One, Title Three, McKinney-Vento, so that people that are looking at this venue for the first time, they have some idea of what we're talking about. as an educator, I never want to speak over people's heads. I want everyone to know what we're talking about. Currently, the United States, well, not currently, but it has been for at least a century or so, we have always had a Department of Education in our country for the simple fact that the administration or the fairness of education in our country can be shared by all people. So the Department of Education was formed. And in the Department of Education, there are a number of entities that basically administer funds to school districts throughout the country. Currently, the Department of Education distributes roughly $928 billion to school districts across the country. Okay, so that's just under $1 trillion. It's a $1 trillion funded um, cabinet position in our country, and for the incoming president to say that he is going to dismantle such a needed cabinet in our government is beyond frightening. It's almost ridiculous if we really want to talk about it. Just looking at some of the things that are going, and what I'm going to be using is I'm going to be using some figures generated from AI to help us, because those are probably the closest to the most accurate figures that we can understand regarding this. And I'm just basically going to use the top 5 largest school districts in our country, which you guys in New York are number one. Los Angeles, its school district is number 2. Chicago is number 3. You have Dade County in Miami is number 4, and Philadelphia is roughly number 5, the largest school districts in our country. And out of that nearly $1 trillion, those cities that I just mentioned, they basically draw the most from it. And just pulling up some figures, looking at it, these particular districts, roughly 15 to 20% of their budgets come from the Department of Education in Title I. So with the question being asked, what would happen if the Department of Education and its budget were removed from existence? It just a simple matter. It's like in your own household, if 1 out of every $5 that you earn was no longer in your salary, how would we operate? I just want to put it in just a pragmatic sense, a practical sense for us to understand, and then we can put it together, because I want this to appeal to people rather than giving you the minutia of numbers. I want to explain it in that way. So if 1 out of every $5 that you earn were taken away, how would we survive in our households?
Interrupt
Okay.
you here, Dr. Barnes. I'm going to have the other two panelists say something, and then I'm going to come back to you because I have a specific question about
Great.
education and what
Thank you.
they're planning on doing, and also what has happened since 1980 to come back to. Um,
Amen.
Glenn, I think you're probably the person that will probably have the most exciting things to say. I mean, people are going crazy right now. The stock market is flourishing. All my friends that invest are like getting, they're buying crypto like crazy. People want to buy Amazon and Tesla stock. And so I'm not hearing the trepidation and fear from people. In fact, I had a conversation today when someone said, well, with Trump, I had money in my pocket, even though I didn't vote for him. And so I'm just wondering, um, I want to turn it over to you.
I
Are
laugh
the
about
rest of
that.
us, playing Chicken Little here?
Well, first I have to issue the disclaimer. I am not a financial professional. But I've worked in payments for a number of years. As you said, like 20 years, working for firms like Discover, MasterCard, PayPal. So I've seen the fluctuations in the market and seen the tech boom and things like that. So one of the things that people are thinking, here's I think the prevailing thought is that the market has been immune um, to bad administrations. I guess everybody's forgotten COVID and forgotten kind of what happened right before COVID and looked at the Obama economy, which was strong, which was inherited by the Trump administration in 2016, which then the tax cuts, which actually took a big chunk of the economy. The economy was failing, and then COVID just kind of pushed it over the cliff. And I think people have forgotten that. We've got short memories when it comes to a lot of things, as we can see from the election. Um, but I think what we can expect is I think the boom in crypto and other things were because of a lot of lip service that was given to them prior to the election to raise money. So there was a lot there. I think the tariffs that are coming are going to negatively impact the economy in many different ways. When you think about raising prices, and people think tariffs go one way. No, if we issue tariffs on Mexico, guess what they're going to do? They're going to issue tariffs back to us. That's going to drive up prices. That's going to drive down demand. That's going to reduce profits. That's going to directly impact your stock prices. So we'll enjoy this brief delusion of the market booming back to like the tech levels in the early 90s and 2000s, but I don't think it's going to last. Once the administration's economic policy is revealed, we'll know a lot more. So I'll give it about 12, 14 months, and we'll see where it is then. Now, there will be some stocks that will survive, of course. Amazon is not going anywhere. A number of the major tech ones going, the big five, as I like to call them, the Amazons, the Microsofts of the world aren't going anywhere in the Google. So those are always going to be good investments. But those aren't the ones we have to worry about. Those are going to survive the storm because number one, they're too big and too profitable, and too ingrained in the market. But there's going to be others. The other things we're going to see is what happens with banking, what happens in that market as people don't have the money to put in the banks and invest. And one of the ones that are particularly important to me in my industry, in the payments industry, is what's happening there in innovation and tech, and how many people. Because one of the things we do is serve the underbanked. So you're looking at about 15 million people that are underbanked right now. I think that number is going to grow, as you can see. And then what are people doing there to save money, to generate wealth? Those are the things that we're concerned about. So there's a underlying group of people that are just ignored in economics that I think are going to suffer even more. So, that's my unprofessional, again, my unprofessional advice on this, but that's what I think.
Thank you. Thank you. And I have some follow-up questions for you as well. And Dr. Hannon, we are coming to you to get your input on where your perspective on what we can expect in the health and certainly uh people with disabilities and also any other thing you want to add to the conversation.
Sure. Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay. Awesome. First and foremost, shout out to the Noops of the Brooklyn Long Island alumni chapter, and for attorney and sister Laura Harding for moderating, and all the guests here, and anybody who may be listening in. I appreciate the opportunity. As was shared, I'm trained as a professional counselor. I see clients in a private, Black woman-owned private practice in Trenton, New Jersey, coming to you from the Jersey side, and while I do have teaching responsibilities at my institution, I still make it my business to see clients. And I appreciate both the opportunity and the pleasure to bat fourth or bat fifth, right? Because all of the folks who have laid out the groundwork for what we might expect and the things about which we should be thinking all influence people's mental health and well-being. When we think about educational opportunities, when we think about folks' money and how much bread they got in their pocket, when they think about the kind of housing opportunities they do or don't have and how accessible that is, those are all can be very easily identified, potentially, depending on how many resources you have and the kinds of resources to which you have access. They can all be absolutely psychological distressors, right? And when we think about the collective well-being, mental health and well-being of our communities, I'm I'm reminded even with sister Laura talking about at the very beginning, you prompted me to think of Maya Angelou when she told us when somebody shows you who they are, believe them the first time, right? We've seen this movie already, y'all. We've seen it, or we've seen a glimpse of it, right? We've seen a preview of it at least. And so the World Health Organization literally defines people's mental health as well-being with 4 criteria. And I'm not even trying to be deep. All of our mental health is either going to be supported or made at risk or vulnerable if we can do these 4 things. Realize our own abilities, right? Can I tap into my potential? Do I have opportunities to tap into my potential? Can I cope with the normal stressors of life? Car breaks down, kids get sick, I lose my job, my relationship has trouble, right? Cope with the normative stresses of life. 3, can I work productively? Now we're talking about employment opportunities, being employed, being underemployed, or being unemployed, and things like that. And can I make a contribution to my community? What? If we can't do those 4 things, according to the World Health Organization, that means, or if there's anything that stands in the way of us being able to do those 4 things, that means our mental health is at risk, right? And so as we think about the breadth of the issues that have been raised here by these really smart and sharp colleagues on this panel, I think about our collective well-being and the things about which we need to think when we consider that. And if I've learned nothing else with primarily working with Black boys and Latino boys and men as a clinician, and having the privilege to train people to go out and serve communities as a mental health professional, all behavior communicates. So if we're thinking about literally the daylight shooting of United Healthcare's CEO, that's a form of behavior. It's extreme, right? But that is an indication of the kind of stress and the kind of challenges that people are living with every day. And this was a guy who was raised with a significant amount of privilege, right? But he felt so distressed that he thought that this was the best thing to do, to have some form of retribution. And so I think about those things. And when the last thing I'll say, Laura, is when we consider sometimes folks' optimism with the new administration coming in, or some people's distancing from the real issues that we're raising tonight. There's a term that we use in mental health that I know all of y'all know. It's called cognitive dissonance, right? That's a fancy word for literally just saying, I don't have enough capacity to look this thing in the face, because if I look this thing in the face, I might not get out of bed tomorrow, right? If I look this thing in the face, I might not go to work. If I look this thing in the face, I might act like a whole fool with my spouse. And so these are the things I'm thinking about when it comes to like, what do we need to consider about access and access to mental health and our collective mental wellness moving forward, with the new administration coming into office. I hope that makes sense.
No, that made perfect sense. And it dovetails into my next question, which I think really could apply all of you should answer. In listening to your responses, what I'm hearing is that all of this is connected. And so, Alika, you are coming out of a HUD that prioritized home ownership, that really amplified the way that people could use housing choice vouchers to even purchase homes. There's some question about the Biden administration not passing not really finalizing the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule. But for the most part, the Biden administration and HUD under our soror, Marsha Fudge, had really focused on um, increasing home ownership, affordable housing, and protecting rights under the Fair Housing Act. And as we think about the impact that housing insecurity and unaffordability it's going to have, and I want each of you to maybe think about the impact that changes in your particular area will have on the people, all of us. I think the question I have is how do we prepare for that and how do we respond?
So, what's interesting. So Dr. Hannon was just talking about mental health, and it just really made me think about back in 1998, I was working for Goddard Riverside, and my role in 1998 was housing homeless individuals who had a mental health issue. Like that was our population, and bringing them in from the street homelessness into drop-in centers, then transitional housing, and then finding them permanent housing. And when you are out on the street or in shelters, mental health can cause homelessness. And if you're homeless, it can cause mental health challenges, right? Um, and so, with this administration, from day one, the Biden Harris administration did everything they could to address every level of housing, from your street homeless individuals to a family leaving affordable housing, wanting to become a first time home buyer. And so the reason why I mentioned 1998 is because we've been talking about a housing crisis for decades, decades. And every time there's a new administration, the next administration that comes in is going to do it better. But the same people that are working in these housing agencies across the country, the career staff, are the ones that are either working very hard, regardless of who's in the White House. And then you have individuals who have been at these agencies for 30 and 40 years who do not want to see change. And so when I started out with my remarks saying that we need to be bold and do things that we have never done before, I mean that, because we've been going, it's like being on the hamster wheel. Like, we're constantly complaining. And even with, as much as we love Obama, there are people who criticized Obama for the things that he did not do when it came to home ownership opportunities for certain communities. And then there were people that really did appreciate, to your point, the Trump administration when they came in, because some people felt like they had a few dollars in their pockets. And so, you know, I really, will have to say that when you just look at, just going back to like the fair housing piece of it, the laws are the laws, and it's really about how we implement the rules around it. And just real quick, when you also mentioned AFFH, the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing, that has been in the Housing Act since 1968. That language has been there. It was Barack Obama in 2015 who decided to implement the rules around it so that it could make sense. Like, you look at it and say, what does this mean? And so it was Barack Obama who actually went in and implemented rules around it. But then Trump came in right after and said, absolutely not. You will not. And he put a whole halt, instructed Ben Carson at the time to say, no, we will not implement any of this. And then Biden came in after that and said, okay, we are going to, figure this out. And we couldn't even get it across the finish line because of timing and bureaucracy and everything else. My point is, we're going to continue to have these conversations until we do something different. And what this incoming administration has done is showed people that you got to be bold.
So is DOGE with Vivek and Elon Musk the answer?
God.
Okay, I'm gonna put a pin in that. Dr. Barnes, I'm gonna put a pin in that. Dr. Barnes, I'm coming back to you because you mentioned how long the ed has been around, the education department, and prior to 1980, with the Congressional Act of it standing alone, it really was a part of I think it was health, education,
Yep.
and
And
maybe
welfare,
welfare
HEW.
or something
Yeah,
else. So my
exactly.
question is, because what this administration is kind of said is that, well, we're thinking, in addition to putting the head of a wrestling, nominating the head of a wrestling uh, um, entity as the Department of Education, with who may or may not have graduated other than high school. Um, what they've said is, well, maybe we need to do this again. Maybe we need to give Title I to something else, and we need to give IDEA, which deals with people with disabilities, to somewhere else. McKinney-Vento is the pot of money that deals with unhoused or
Homeless.
homeless
Right.
families and families in transitional housing. So they could say, look, we're doing what Mrs. Samuel said. You know, the bureaucracy is keeping things from happening. And so, if we get rid of ed and we put people back in these different entities, like maybe put Title I in Health and Human Services or IDEA in Health and Human Services, we may actually see the change that we want. What saith you?
I, uh, I totally disagree with that. A big part of the Department of Education is not just um, the fund, but their administration, their ability to administer the different programs and vet the reliability of programs that can be included under their department head. They do more uh, than anything when it comes to that. Um, they this is, I believe, and I'm going to be bold. I appreciate you all making the statement about being bold. I believe this is a systematic maneuver to facilitate the education gap, which also facilitates the wealth gap in our country.
Mm.
Because if we can ensure that people of color or people of less privilege are not provided the same opportunities to be educated as those who are privileged that go to um, private institutions, um, then we are basically going to create a larger wealth gap. And I believe, and I'm going to be bold and say it, I believe that is intentional.
Thank you for being bold. I hope we continue this boldness. Thank you,
Yes.
Dr. Barnes. I'm gonna go to Glenn because Glenn, I have something to ask you that's in keeping with this dismantling of institutions and being bold
Mhm.
and this new administration coming in. As I was listening to Mrs. Ampry Samuels, as I was listening to Dr. Barnes, what I kept thinking about was the Department of Education isn't just people who are working in Washington, D.C. It's not just
No.
professionals. We're talking about an Office of Civil Rights that
Right.
employs hundreds of attorneys. So to me, what I hear when I hear about the dismantling of a lot of these federal agencies, even HUD was gutted under Ben Carson. Except for many of the long-term employees that were protected under federal rules. I also hear about an impact. PG County in Maryland is
Maryland.
considered one of the most uh, prosperous Black communities,
Mhm.
and that's largely because many of those people are federal government employees. So you have couples with federal government employee salaries, which on their own may not be a lot, but together gives you a huge bump. They're homeowners.
Mhm.
They're putting their kids in private schools. So I'm wondering how this dismantling of the professional class as well
Mhm.
is going to impact the economy, because now we're talking about people's inability to pay their mortgage,
Right.
people's ability to find jobs, and especially get this whole anti-DEI piece with the belief that any person of color somehow doesn't have the experience, despite having 2, 3 degrees and over 20
Right.
years. But someone who can pontificate and be on television can certainly run um, trillion-dollar agencies that have national security implications. I'd like to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think, and one of the things Dr. Barnes mentioned about education and wealth and the tie, but there's also a life tie to that. There's an average lifespan of less of college graduates that's 10 to 15 years greater than those without a college degree. And why is that? Because your education is better. You understand health. You understand how to take care of yourself better. You understand and you can and attain those jobs that pay well and give you a better quality of life. Because also what impacts your lifespan? The neighborhood you live in. I think Roland Martin did a study on that and said people with FICO scores that were 20 points less lived on an average of 5 to 10 years less than people with a higher FICO score. So education is, and it may sound cliche, but education truly is the key to a better life and a longer life. So you have to think about all of those ramifications, dismantling a centralized organization that regulates accountability, that regulates higher education, that regulates state and local rights. And this hasn't just started. Those of you that are old enough to remember Pat Buchanan, he was running for president against George H.W. Bush in 1992. And he was all about dismantling the Department of Education. That was one of the platforms he was running on. He used the NEA and the teachers unions because, we want to bust up as many unions as possible. That was his platform. But this has been a systematic, progressive move toward this. So it didn't just start now. It started 30 years ago with discussions about it, just like just like packing the courts and getting conservative judges and all of that. It's been a systematic move toward point that we are at today. This is kind of like the crowning achievement of that. Project 2025 was just the revelation. There's been a Genesis and Exodus and many other books written about this way before that. This is just the final book on it. So we have to look at that as well. So I think there's a huge impact to answer your question, not just on education today, but on what the future generations will have to deal with because of these changes. So yeah, and there's no doubt Linda McMahon was put there to break up the agency. She served in the Trump administration as head of SBA before from 2016 to 2020. And of course, she was in WWE, but what is that? A corporate entity that does what? Costs. Something to know, WWE wrestlers don't even pay for their own insurance. They pay for their own insurance. So they don't even insure them. You're getting dropped on your head nightly, but you don't even have a company that pays for insurance. Do you really think she's there to do anything other than look at this from a corporate perspective and break it up?
Thank you. Dr. Hannon, my question for you, given the work you're doing, is we know that disproportionately Black men, Black boys, when it comes to employment, are underemployed. We also know that in terms of mental health services, we're looking at an administration that has been very vague about their health care plan. They have plans. That but have spent more time focused on dismantling the affirmative the ACH or the Obamacare. There are concerns about access to Medicaid and Medicare that will definitely affect certainly the most disenfranchised of us and the young people as well as the seniors. And so my question to you is, you've kind of laid out how we see this from the perspective of everyone's agencies and subject matter area having this impact. But what does that mean for you as someone who's still seeing clients, and how people will be able to access certainly mental health services and other health services in general?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, the perspectives and arguments that have been articulated up to this point are so razor sharp and precise. I think what comes to mind for me, and this is in no attempt to oversimplify, three things come to mind for me. One, and I'm not even trying to be deep, but I think as we work up the courage to confront and be bold in the midst of these anticipated and reasonably predictable changes, there may be a form of collective grieving that takes place, right? Like, we talk about grief many times when we experience the loss of someone by death. But what we're having to really look at, what we're having to additionally look at or comparably look at is the loss of access and the loss of opportunity. And that can weigh in on somebody in ways that prompt them to sleep less well and not sleep regularly, right? Their sleep is disrupted. Their diets are disrupted. Um, their patience thresholds are disrupted. And so now it becomes interpersonal. So I'm thinking about a collective grief that we may be experiencing, a collective grieving experience. And you can look into grieving by way of the Kubler-Ross model, the 5 stages of grief, right? That may be have some relevance, or some other grief models that acknowledge that we're losing something and we still have to work to maintain and hopefully even surpass what used to be. There's an acceptance that has to take place. The second thing I think of is with respect to access to care. This is why when all of us talk about public schooling in this country, this is why it's so important, because many times, particularly when kids and adults live in communities that are under invested and have been made economically vulnerable um, through policy and redlining and things like that, many times the first space people get access to care is through their public schools. The community schools model is one, and there's plenty of them in New York. I know it's plenty of them because I worked at Brooklyn College for a year. When you can go to a school and get access to mental health services by counselors and social workers and psychologists, when you can go to your public school and get access to dental care, when you can go to your public school and get access to all of these kinds of services, it tells us and reminds us that our public institutions, I'm not even trying to throw shade at private institutions. What I am saying, though, is our public institutions have to be so strong because they have to set the baseline standard of care, not just educationally, but also the gateway to other forms of services that we might access. And then the last thing I'm thinking is this: at the end of the day, we have to make sure and continue to advocate locally, think globally, act locally. We have to continue to locally organize to make sure kids, adolescents, and adults can have access to quality health care overall, but specifically mental health care. SAMHSA, the National Institute of Mental Health, they're all reporting that Black and Brown folks are experiencing depressive conditions, anxiety conditions, and other conditions at way higher rates. The good thing is that we're actually saying that this is what we're experiencing. They're acknowledging the trauma that they've experienced over years. So we're actually normalizing saying, yo, this happened to me and this is how I'm responding. Now we have to make sure the workforce is ready to care for them in ways that they need and deserve. And so some of the work that I'm able to do with respect to research is finding out how we get more Black and brown clinicians in care spaces, because we know Black and brown clients prefer to see Black and brown clinicians. And so these are some of the things I'm thinking of. Um, Collective grieving and acknowledging what's going on. Secondly, making sure our public institutions, particularly our K-12 and higher education institutions, are stable. And then making sure there's access to care by supporting the development and workforce of Black and brown clinicians across the country.
Now, thank you for this high fastball, because the question I have for all of you is, you talked about being bold. You talked about advocating, but we really have an incoming administration that basically has conditioned aid. It's talking about conditioning aid to California in response to the fires. You have a president who basically during an incoming president who basically during his campaign said that he was going to go after people who came after him, name checking Attorney General Tish James from New York City, but also name checking certain uh, media entities. And then we had Congress try to pass the nonprofit killer bill, which they couched as a response to Hamas supporters hiding in nonprofits, but literally was a ploy to give the Treasury Department the ability to take away a nonprofit's 501c3 designation, and if they were found to um, support terrorism, which, based on the incoming president's definition, could be someone who didn't apply with him. So the question didn't agree with him. So the question I have is, how is one able to be bold and fearless in advocacy and also in calling in and calling out inequities and changes and protections that need to be maintained in the face of censorship, potential censorship, and also potentially um, losing your organization. It is particularly interesting to me that NAACP, Urban League, those sort of institutions that get money from a lot of different places have been kind of quiet about some of these things moving forward. So I'd love to hear all of your thoughts on what do we do? What are some steps or things we can do to be bold in the face of fear and threats to your livelihood, as well as censorship?
I, I'll just jump in quickly. I love the fact of working as a collective. Like Dr. Hannon was just talking about, like a collective grief. If we are not working collectively in unity, in partnership, and when I say that, I mean even in the housing space, this administration is all about the dollar. People want to get paid. And they talk a lot about, as they're talking about gutting HUD, they're also talking about privatization of everything, right? But there's also that concept of public-private partnerships. As a community, we need to make sure that we are going back to the days of the churches being the ones to build senior housing. All of those 202s affordable housing that was built 30 years ago was done with the churches. That's not going anywhere. They're still going to provide resources for housing choice vouchers and the HUD 202s and just those different types of programs and initiatives that make money. And so we need to be working as a collective and purchasing property. That's not going anywhere. You can still purchase property, but are we having those conversations? Those conversations are being had, but we're just not talking about it, which is a good thing. But we need to make sure that we are doing that at scale so that we are part of what is happening. That old saying of don't let it happen to you but with you. But we can't be reactionary. We have to be, again, bold and being out there and being part of these deals, and a team of 2 and 3 people purchasing the building on the corner. That's a reality. Those programs exist. We just have to tap into them and do it, to scale. So I just wanted to put that out there because that's something that we can do regardless of if HUD is being gutted. The programs are still going to exist for some people. So why can't we be part of that?
If I could jump in really fast, your point's well taken. And Frederick Douglass told us a long time ago, power concedes nothing without a demand. So I think there's some risks that we have to assume in in acknowledging that our economic viability may feel and actually be a bit more vulnerable in this moment. But I remember in more conservative administrations in the past, the Bush administrations, even the past Trump administration, if we know what they value, and again, privatization. So I'm gonna say this: profit over people, right? If those are some of the values that we know exist, then it makes sense for our fraternity and sorority organizations to tap in to raising money because we know we have evidence that the administration may support more economic investment. And so we have to place ourselves at the table. We have to engage with churches and other faith institutions to say, okay, well, the money may not be going to private institutions, I mean public institutions, but they go into faith-based institutions. And if there are congruent values between the faith-based organizations and our collective agenda, then hey, maybe it goes through the church. Maybe, well, it ain't gonna go through the mosque because we already know how, because Islamophobia. But we know how it goes, and we can engage with faith communities in ways that we have in the past to maybe not lose the footing with respect to our ability to initiate and facilitate change and sustain viability.
I'd like to contribute, and I look forward to hearing Brother Murray's comments because he's been spot on all evening. But we learned something watching uh, the incoming president go through when he wasn't sure that he was going to win. We watched him go through a number of trials, a number of court appearances, and the wear and tear took on him. We need to use, being bold, we need to use the courts to our advantage. The courts did not unanimously support Donald Trump in a lot of the things that he did. And we need to think back, though he's not a fraternity brother of mine, but he did a tremendous job. Thurgood Marshall, we need to look at how he used the court system to accomplish all of the things that a lot of the things that this generation don't even know how we came about. It came about through Thurgood Marshall and the use of the courts. When we see people being targeted or what have you, my law enforcement background tells me that that's an assault, that's a threat. We need to use the courts to our advantage, but make sure that we use them correctly when we see assaults being made to public institutions and organizations, what have you. Because there are some justices that will uphold the oath that they took to assume the positions where they sit, the benches where they sit. When we see all of these things taking place, a lot of these are legal entities that can be remedied in our favor. And once the precedence is set, we won't keep having to go back and go through these things over and over again. You see, and I pray I'm making sense. But we need to be
You
bold.
are making sense, but as a lawyer, the way the Supreme Court has been throwing precedent out the window,
Well, you know
I think
what?
part of what people are a little concerned about
We
is that
can't
certainly
just discount them totally. Everything is not going to go to the Supreme.
no, everything
Um,
isn't. And I agree. And I think that there definitely are justices that are poised throughout the country to do it. I just wonder because frankly, the Paulie Murray, Thurgood Marshall, Charles Hamilton Houston strategy has literally been co-opted by the right. And we've seen that with the Asian association suing to end affirmative action as we know it. We're seeing that with the way they tried the Fisher case, which luckily got decided for us, but then this next case kind of made it moot. They're using the same strategy. And I do agree with you that we need to use the courts, but I think we need to stop using the courts to protect what we have and maybe start using the courts, to your point, in an affirmative way.
we have to,
People.
because um, objective truths, constitutional rights, these things, they have to stand. And that's all that got us, out of slavery, got us out of Jim Crow, got us thus far. So we can't now say, oh, well, it doesn't work anymore. We need to encourage our young, bright legal minds to pick up these causes and to pick up these value hits and move forward with it.
Glenn?
Yeah, one of the things, and our company is co-founded by Ben Crump, the attorney, the civil rights attorney. And one of the things he says, and we actually are using this as one of our mottos, economic freedom makes all other freedoms possible. To answer your question, I think there needs to be more coalition building. If we talk about being truly strategic, if I think about, you mentioned the NAACP, you mentioned the Urban League not being as vocal as they probably needed to be. And I think there needs to be more of a coming together, a joining together of organizations with an economic focus. Because if we can begin, as Alika said, buying up properties, buying buildings, investing in stocks, investing in each other. There's a ton of VC capital money now that's minority owned, that's looking to support businesses. And if we can really marshal that power there is tremendous economic power out there. We have to understand that. The other thing we need to understand is we're 22 months from another election. We're 22 months from a midterm. There are 5 seats, five, that sit between control of Congress and actually being able to stop some of the movement on some of the laws that are happening on this administration. It's not guaranteed that they're going to get all of their votes now in these next 2 years. But we've got to start thinking now like they've thought about this for the last 10, 12 years. We have to be more strategic. We have to do better to educate on what it means to not vote. And we have to, you know, sometimes the best lessons learned, as my mother said, are the hard ones. And sometimes hard heads make for a softer lesson learning, but and that might be what is happening in these next couple of years that we've have to learn that lesson and be shown that. 2 million people sat out an election. We were talking about this before the show. 2 million people didn't vote. 2 million less people than in 2020. I don't know what reason 2 million less people would vote this year, but they did. And we have to understand that. So it's a three-pronged attack. There's the economic attack, but there's the political and understanding that as well. And then the educational, how do we bring people along and help them to really see what this means for your future? And I don't know if I answered your correction directly, but we were on that kick and I was like, I was in it. I was feeling that one.
Can I just want to jump in there real quick. And in the event you wasn't thinking about going there, but I want to mention the communication piece of it, because we have to communicate in a different way. Looking at how our young people get their news from TikTok and
Yeah.
X, Instagram, we definitely, and so that's another piece of, I mean, there's a whole lot of reasons why there was 2 million less, right? We're not going to talk about the candidate and everything else, and timing.
Right.
But that piece of how we communicate. And one last quick thing, when I was in the city council, you know, I was doing my newsletters and reaching out to constituents through the newsletter. And the intern in my office said, you need to start doing videos. And I says, well, I don't do videos. And she says, well, you're not talking to my generation. I think it's disrespectful. You're not talking to me. And she was so serious. And I really,
Right.
in that moment, that absolutely, I am not talking to you. I am disrespecting you because I'm only talking to my seniors and the folks that go to work every day, or the people who I can hand out a flyer on a corner. I am not doing videos on social media, and I should be to reach your generation. You're absolutely right. And so, you know, that's another piece that we need to figure out over the next.
Right. We're 2 generations away from Civil Rights, Voting Rights Act, and things like that. So people have lost the impact of it.
Mhm.
You know, you don't get the stories from my grandmother who talked about the first time she went to vote living in the South, living in Arkansas, and being able to go to the polls. And that's why it was always a point whenever there was election, she would walk to the polls. But you don't get those stories anymore now because it's just not there. We're not connecting with that generation that we need to be able to do that. So you're so on point with that on how we communicate.
And I think the other piece I'd like to add is really this shift. So, as a younger leader of a civil rights organization, um, there's I think what I hear you all saying is one, we have to shift how we do things, and we have to figure out what works from the way we've always done things and what we need to add to the arsenal. And I think that this is part of the struggle that I'm seeing. Um, in the community. Like, we have younger people who are very much focused on money. And their belief is, if I make all the money in the world, I will be free of structural racism. I will be free of discrimination. I will be able to live in the big house and have the Jay-Z and Beyonce life and do all of the things. And there's the older generation who, and we're somewhere in between, some of us, where we we know the wisdom of what is to be. We've kind of grown up under the folks who did some of this work. We've added our special sauce, and we're almost caught in this middle where we want to take from both, but both ends are requiring absolute loyalty to the way they do it and trying to push the elders to do something a little different and engage the young people is a very interesting um dynamic. And so I'm just wondering, outside of communication, because outside of coalition building, what else do we need to do? Because even our communication is flawed. I'll give you an example. If you're part of a D9 organization, we all were like, get out and vote. We always do to get out and vote. We don't educate people on what they should be thinking about. We get out the vote for federal presidential elections. We don't focus a lot on local elections on the off year. And so I'm just wondering, how do we work on changing some of our strategies? Because I'll tell you one thing, the Republicans have a playbook and it's
Exactly.
and it's long, but I feel as if,
And
the
it's been
rest of us,
effective.
and it's been effective. I feel the rest of us, we haven't built a playbook or a bench or a pathways to bring young people up unless they fall in line in the more traditional ways.
Right. No, I think, and there needs to your point, the ground floor. People need to understand the powers of a district attorney. People need to understand how much power a district attorney actually holds to convict and hold accountable police misconduct. Important issues that affect everyday life. Understanding your mayor's rights, understanding your alderman, your committeeman, especially in Chicago. I'm in the Chicago area, so you think about the power that the committeemen hold and the aldermen hold in those communities. They have say so in what businesses come in and out of the communities. So holding people accountable 365 at every level of government, and that's a challenge. I don't know, what's the answer to be able to do that, but people need to understand that every election is an important election. Every election is an election for your life, and can mean life or death for you in some ways.
What does hold people accountable mean? Because I feel like we say that all the time. And
Holden, I think your elected officials need to be held accountable. For one, I've always criticized the Democratic administrations because the CFPB has been great at going after banks, but they've not touched payday lenders, who are a bigger threat to the community than Wells Fargo ever will be. If I'm charging you 300% on a debt that you need to keep your lights on, and I'm continuously billing you for that over 2 and 3 years, how much money are you getting? You're getting more money than you'll ever put in the bank. So things like that is that we need to hold everybody accountable for every aspect of life. And that's a huge one for me, just coming from the finance world, because of all the heavy regulations I've seen working for banks, working for processors, but I've never seen them go after that organization. And so things like that for me is what I look at as holding people accountable. I'm not sure. I'm sure everybody else has a different opinion on that.
Yeah, well, holding accountable, the only way you hold elected officials accountable is by uh, understanding their voting records. Okay, what does this candidate actually vote for? Does he vote for things that are a benefit to his constituency, or is he voting his interests? Is he voting his pocket interests or his party interests? We need to start educating people that the voting record of someone tells you whether that individual uh, needs to be representing you. That's the holding accountable that I think about. You'd be surprised at the number of elected officials that miss votes. Why would you continue to elect someone to office that misses uh, uh, X amount of votes per year, per voting year, or what have you? We have to hold the people accountable through voting, and we have to show that this individual is being held accountable because of it. That's the only way everybody's going to fall in line and support us and
I,
stuff. So
I,
it takes work on our part.
I want
Go
to
ahead.
push back on that a little bit, only because I have Alika here. And when Alika was in office, the things she did for her community in Brownsville, East New York, if you know that community, were things that literally had not been done before. And I don't want to pardon me for putting you on the spot, Alika,
Yeah.
but you really lost to a lesser opponent.
The person who the
There's
voting record and
correct.
like literally was the worst.
There's no way that
And so
you
this is
should
the
have
point. This is the
lost.
point I'm making.
Give me a
This is the
yeah,
exact
give me a
point that
minute,
I'm making.
Dr. Barnes. There's no way, based on how Alika was out in that community, what she did for community members. I mean, I was shocked, to be honest with you. We even did a forum for you, if I remember correctly. EKC, our alumni chapter,
So
hosted
it
a
so
forum.
and that's why I go back to the communication piece of it, right? Because people vote party and people vote name recognition and people just
See,
vote for what they're used to
that's
voting
the
for.
point I'm making.
And so you can't hold people accountable because back to your point, what does that mean? What does holding someone accountable actually mean? Because it doesn't matter to like even with this election that we just went through, it got down to sound bites. It what made people feel good. What mattered to me at that particular time. So me going out there and helping to pass a $98 billion budget for the city council for the city of New York and doing all of this development meant nothing to the seniors who wanted to make sure that they had their meals at their senior center that summer. And so sometimes we could get we can talk about accountability and what voters should be focused on, all of that, when we have to kind of, I don't want to say tell people what they want to hear, but figure out what is important. When do we put our blinders on and just push through? Because sometimes people won't get it. And how do we look at politics in a different way, because the conversation is not the same as it was in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 80s. 2025 is a different day.
And this goes into my next question. A lot of these Democratic electeds, both in New York, I mean, you look at the mayor, you look at the governor, but you look at other entities who basically, even the Congress people, who are basically saying, well, we're going to work with this administration. And the question I have is, I get it. There are pieces of it you have to go along to get what you need. But we're also probably looking at someone that could be a potential threat to democracy as we know it, right? And so I'm just wondering, like, how much of going along and working with do we have to do? Or is that the bold piece, or is the bold piece being completely resistant?
Let me just
Give
say
me the razor thin margin.
just real quick.
Mhm.
Going back to the presidential transition 2025, right? I don't want to say what the name is. We already know what I'm talking about, 2025. When you look at that document, all 800 some odd pages, when you look at the housing piece, 15 pages, a lot of it talks about removing the government, the big government, the federal government, and focused on local government,
Yeah.
giving the power to the people and focused on the local politics. And let's just say you didn't have a public housing authority across the entire city of New York that has oversight of the federal government. What would it look like to have a Brooklyn Housing Authority or Trenton? What would it look like to have a localized housing authority within the borough? The borough hall, like Brooklyn Borough Hall, is the governing entity of the Brownsville Housing Authority.
Well, I live on Long Island, so I could tell you what it looks like. It depends.
It depends. Depends on who where the locality is, right? And who's elected to office. But my point is, we have to really start thinking about government in a different way and doing more to empower on that local level. I'm not saying that what the folks are saying within that document makes a whole lot of sense. But when we're talking about government and locally, all politics is local.
What I hear you saying though is that we've been kind of tolling the death knell on democracy and the end of these federal agencies, but there's actually an opportunity for us to strengthen what's happening locally, and to therefore maybe have an impact for our communities in a way that we frequently don't think about. Is that what I hear you saying?
Yes, because people could identify with something that is local. People don't see themselves in the bigger picture necessarily, but when
Right.
localized.
No, I totally agree. And I think here's where the point I was attempting to make earlier. So where are the opportunities? And so while I have grave concerns about a decentralized federal government that with threats of the diminishing of the Department of Education, that scares me, right? But what I do acknowledge is that if the language and the rhetoric is, well, you're going to have local control, you got local control of your school district, and that's fine. So there's an opportunity there where the community's values may be has the potential, right? I'm trying to speak carefully, has the potential to be the guiding force. The risk is if there are efforts like we think about in Florida and using, giving students the opportunity for AP courses in African American studies, right? There's going to be resistance to that, but there's still the opportunity for more local control. So there's very much a tightrope that has to be walked that says, okay, if you're going to give local control to us, and this my community, we black, we brown, it's 50, 11 languages that are spoken here, and we're going to do things our way. I think there's an opportunity that exists, but we also have to acknowledge that the accountability part, to me, that's where the federal government comes in. The accountability is lost. So it's an acknowledgement. And at the end of the day,
Yeah.
what we're talking about is humanizing people, right? Like, forget profit, forget just making bread and making money. Do you see me? As a constituent, am I seen, heard, valued, and affirmed? And if people don't feel that way, they're going to do what's most comfortable and familiar. And I think that's some of the consequence when we talk about folks who sat out the election or the inability to galvanize in ways that we may have
Here-
hoped in the past.
Here's my pushback with that though.
Sure.
I live on Long Island. We have over 120 different school districts with inequitable funding that reinforce the segregation that has been there since uh pre-World War II and definitely post-World War II, the GI Bill and all the work that Robert Moses did. And so my question is, what I am seeing with this local control is the impact that it has on the inability to build affordable housing because locally they're creating um, exclusionary zoning rules about how houses can be built. Education wise, we're starting to see some of the same things we're seeing in Florida in terms of even though New York has a culturally responsive, sustaining education framework, some districts don't do DEI. The superintendents can't talk about DEI. Even in some of predominantly Black and Brown districts, the school board is completely white. And so some of the apathy that we're seeing on the federal election process and the inability or the unwillingness to hold people accountable is what we're seeing locally as well. And my question to you all is how, we talked about communication, we talked about accountability. How do we get people interested? Because here's what people do. Tonight in Amityville, there's going to be a community meeting about the closing of a school. Everyone showed up for the hearing at the school board. But in Amityville, that school board is predominantly white for a community that is predominantly Black and Brown. People show up in response to an act. How do we get them to show up before something happens? How do we get them to be affirmative instead of reactive?
Oof.
That's the question. That's the $1 million question.
That's a
Of,
TikTok.
of all time. Well,
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. You needed the crystal ball there to show people here's the impact of what you do. If that's the crystal ball question.
And I'm watching the young people in their response to the end of TikTok and Facebook and what's
Oh
happening
yeah,
with the government. They've gone on and they're all signing on the red note.
Yep.
Right.
yep.
And so I'm just wondering how we can take from that and also how we can mobilize them around these issues because on their own they're saying, look, we're not putting up with this foolishness. So we're going to see you and raise you. Right? Come get Red Note now. We all going to be learning as they put how to curse in Mandarin. And I'm just wondering um how do we do that? How do we harness that? But how do we also get other people involved to take that level of ownership and response to that will center what our communities need?
hmm.
And it could just be one thing. I don't need, this isn't an issue that happens. So I always tell people when I'm talking about racism, I'm like, we're not going to solve racism. We all are brilliant and committed, but we're not going to solve racism just because we went to a couple workshops and passed a couple laws. So, and certainly not in the space of 60 years. So, what do you think are 2 or 3 steps that each of us personally or in our professional um uh in our professional places can what are 1, 2, 3 things that you think we need to be doing? So I heard communication, using more videos to reach a younger um base, so which means that not necessarily always focusing on the elders who we know will come out to vote but may skew conservative. I heard coalition building, um, which is really try to think how we can come together and advocate for the important things we need. I heard civic education around accountability and the importance of your voice in your vote. Um, what else are we saying? Be bold. Be as bold as the incoming administration has been bold in everything that they're seeking to do. Take advantage of the opportunities that are there, even when it looks like there's nothing there. I heard look for the opportunities that could prompt change and what else? What else do we have?
I think current organizations, the way they're set up, they don't do a good job of communicating what they've done. So this gets back to communication. Sanford Samuel talked about communication and how they do it, but if you were listening to the election and you never knew anything about the candidates, they would have you think that we're on the verge of a depression
Mhm.
when the jobs reports every year, every month were positive. The economy was booming. Um, 2020 to 2024, the markets did tremendous. But I saw an interview, Jamie Dimon was on talking about how bad it was and how bad it was for people and things like that. And oh, it's going to be terrible and it's going to be so much better now. Um, which was totally false. Which is totally a falsehood. That was an opinion because, maybe you didn't get selected as Treasury Secretary the last couple of administrations, so that might be a little bit of sour grapes. But I mean, you've got to do a better job of talking about what you've done. Your resume needs to speak. You need to be yelling out the resume if you're a politician, if you're in this administration, if you're in a department that's doing things, you need to yell that loudly, but also related to how it impacts your constituents, how it made life better for people. I think that's something that I've always said that the Democratic Party has been very bad at doing is tooting their own horn. And this is an era of tooting your own horn. Sometimes you toot your horn and you're lying about what you're tooting about, but you still toot it and you say it with confidence and people believe it. So this is the era of that. So figuring out a better way to talk about the things that you truly are doing to make life better for people.
And
It's
I
the what's in it for me generation.
And I was saying earlier too, that whole like we're so focused on being politically correct and saying things the right way and not pissing people off, and having compassion. You want to have all of that, do all of that, but at the same time, sometimes you just have to tell the story, and then tell the story the way folks can understand it. Like it's communication, right? But speak folks' language. And like, under the previous administration with Trump, when he hired up all of the regional administrators, all of the secretaries, it was people flooded. Political appointees was flooded throughout the field, throughout the regions. And under this Biden administration, it was only 10 of us, one political appointee per region. I did not have any other political person in the office with. They were all in Washington, D.C. But I'm hearing from the transition team, they're coming in with specialists, senior advisors for every subject matter. And it was because we said, oh, we're not supposed to do that. When you look at the language with SCSs, you're not supposed to hire under this particular structure. And they just come in and just do whatever and have to be told you can't do this. And so that's going back to just being bold and just not working within that box.
Yeah. Do you think that had anything to do with the fact that HUD was being headed by a Black woman? Because I almost feel that when people of color are leading, and we're seeing this with LA Mayor Karen Bass, right? They're held to a different standard.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think what I hear you saying is be bold, but I'm wondering if the reason many times people aren't bold is because we are held to a different standard.
So Secretary,
Oh, and so how do you
she
get?
was, but everything comes from the White House. So the
Mhm.
president appoints the secretaries, and
Mhm.
then the regional administrators come. Then we're appointed to represent the secretary and the administration. Everything comes from the White House. And
Mhm.
so she was bold in what we're doing at HUD. She was the one that pulled that implemented PAVE and reentry, and communities able to do the foreclosure sales and holding that for community members only. That was all Secretary Fudge. But as far as allowing for there to be um, political appointees just across the country, that was something that came from the administration itself.
It was almost like when President Obama was first elected, it took him so long to hire staff in the agencies because everyone had to almost, if you had anything that could be construed as negative, you
Mm.
were very easily kicked out. But this goes back to us having um, to shift to a new way of doing things. Because clearly, with the election of a convicted felon,
Oh,
it shows that um, those things may not concern people anymore, which may hold, good news for many other convicted felons who have been unable to be employed or uh, live in certain areas, except for those, of course, who are registered offenders who
Well,
can't.
and I think Laura, I mean your point's well taken with respect to the risk that's associated. When we were talking about being bold, something cynical that came to mind for me was, ask for forgiveness, don't ask for permission.
Mm,
But we can't do that, or if we attempt to do that, there are risks for Black and Brown or other people who have been historically excluded from opportunities. We may not get the chance to ask for permission. We may just be further ostracized. So I'm just acknowledging the tension that exists with the need to be bold and visionary and the consequences that may come from that boldness and that visionary perspective, because we can't ask for permission. People say, ask for permission, ask for forgiveness and not permission. Like we don't have the privilege to do that. That's literally that's rich white man stuff. And ain't none of us here look like that. So Yeah, again, I'm not trying to make light of it. I'm
No,
acknowledging the
I think,
complexity of it.
I think you're saying that. I think, that's part of why DEI is so important and talking about it and really understanding how structural racism works in America. Because when, it's understanding when to be bold, right? Like where you can be bold and almost feeling when you can be allowed to be bold and who gets to be bold. And I don't want to tamp down on being bold, but I think you're right. The tension is there. But hey, we have examples. If we're going to be celebrating Dr. King's birthday on Monday. He was bold at a time where, he was supposed to be too young. Um, the younger people under him thought he was too much. They didn't like him either. And so if it weren't for people like Malcolm X and him and Stokely Carmichael who were bold, then we also wouldn't be where we are today. So some of us are gonna have to fall on the sword and be bold, I guess.
Like
So
Colin Kaepernick.
Dr. Barnes, we need to have more people on the benches so that people could be bold. And when they go to the courts, face a judge, it'll be somebody that look like them and got to stack the
Yeah,
court
well,
locally.
yeah, yeah. Like I said, Colin Kaepernick, he fell on the sword,
it fell on the
and
sword big time.
I think we're too, to be perfectly honest with you, I think we're too afraid to fall on the sword. I think
Mm,
everybody wants to be standing, everybody wants to be alive when the victories are being hailed, but
yeah.
somebody has to fall on the sword
Well,
for
I also
for
say
the
that
victory.
I also think that we don't know discomfort.
Exactly.
I think that, Americans, I mean, unfortunately, a lot of Americans right now, based on California and other places that are happening, Richmond didn't have water for a month. Who knows? Flint's still looking for water. Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi, what they're doing down there to Lumumba is out of control. Chokwe Lumumba Jr. But I do want to say but what I've also noticed is that people don't like discomfort, whether it's talking about harsh issues or doing without. Like when South Korea, when the president decided he was gonna impose martial law, they were like, "Oh no, we're going on a general strike." I cannot imagine America going on a general strike and shutting down. In France, they do this all the time, right? They try to raise the retirement age, and they were like, "Okay, bet, raise this. Try getting to work. Try getting all your resources." They shut down the country and went ham. Obviously, their police officers are a little different than ours because ours may shoot while theirs, just do tear gas. But I say all that to say I am do is are Americans capable?
Mm. Mhm.
Are they willing?
No, I don't think so. I don't think they're willing to be, I don't think the majority are willing to be just uncomfortable at anything they do. Just by the voting patterns tell me that. There are people that vote their interest all day long, every day. They did it last November because it was a safer choice than this unknown that people have painted um, the other candidate to be.
Was it
So I
safe?
voted
Was
with what
it,
I felt was safe to me, what looked safe for me.
was it safer or was it a recommitment to white supremacy and
That's the security and safety of I'm going to take care of
got
you.
it?
I'm going to run all these foreigners out of here. We're going to rack them up. We're going to pack them all up and get them all out of the country.
Because they're the
May I
Workers be
ask
damned
a
and
question?
the economy be damned. We're going to get everybody out of the country. And to your point, the gentleman in Nebraska who was like, yeah, he's not really going to do that. Yeah, he is going to do that. And you're going to suffer for it.
May I ask a question? Were people allowed to come into this forum to listen to it publicly?
Earl. I believe. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. Yes, but only to listen.
Yeah, right. Sure. That's what I mean. Okay.
Yeah.
Because a number of people had been contacting me because when they saw the flyer, it it piqued a ton of interest, and so I shared it, thinking that people would be allowed, and because I think they're missing some rich communications, and I'm quite sure you're probably recording it, and
Yeah,
so I just
Are
wanted to
there
make.
it's
sure?
at, it's currently live on Facebook and YouTube.
Are there
Oh,
any
okay.
questions, Earl? Are there any questions that people may have?
I haven't received any questions from Facebook.
Okay.
Okay.
So I think I'm going to give us another 5 to 10 minutes to kind of wrap up. And I want each of you to think about what it is you want to share with people who are listening to this. What do you want them to come away with? And what is your advice or suggestions to them about how we deal with this evolution of politics post this election cycle?
I'm I'm going to try to jump in here and offer, I think, something fairly simple, but really, really important. I think one of the best in mental health, we talk about protective factors and a range of disciplines. And we talk about what are the factors, what are the influencers or the variables that help keep us safe, whole, optimistic. One of the best ways to do that, even in the midst of very challenging circumstances, is to find your community. So whatever, if you're a Christian and you need to make sure you rock with your church community, then make sure you do that. If you are practicing Muslim and you need to find the folks in your mosque, whoever your community is, it is now arguably more important than ever that in the midst of all these different forms of white supremacy that we have to confront on a daily basis, that you have a community with whom you can unpack it, you can make connections about it, like I'm not crazy, right? And say and experience real universality. Like, I know I'm not the only one who just saw X, right? Um, and to the extent that it's possible, it may be useful to find a professional to talk to about it so that they can help you make sense of what's going on and hopefully retain or possibly even enhance notions of trust, notions of hope, notions of sustainability in really challenging times. So I'm saying find your community because it's going to be important.
Thank you, Sense. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Hannon. Who
Uh,
next?
I would like to say the Department of Education. This is one institution that we're going to have to fight like hell to keep, because if we lose the Department of Education, as the president-elect has vowed to do it, this is the one institution within our government, the one agency within our government that will keep people of color in a position to continue to grow in this country. If the Department of Education, Title I, Title III, if these institutions fail or fall through the Department of Education, we will go back to literally prior to Jim Crow. So we need to fight like hell to keep the Department of Education, because that is the only equity that people of lesser income have to stay on any trajectory or an even course with those who have far more resources.
Want me jumping in?
Either one. I'll let
Go
you
right
go.
ahead. You go right ahead.
Um, I would say to folks, no matter where you're coming from to the table or to this conversation, your voice matters. Like if you're an artist, we need artists as a part of the collective group. If you are a financial manager, we need, let me say this from like a community board perspective. There's teachers, there's folks that drive a bus, there's artists, there's no matter what the profession is, like there's like you matter, you have a purpose, and we need you in this movement in some kind of way. So just show up, and then we're going to figure out the role that you need to play in this. When we were going through the pandemic in 2020, that was the perfect opportunity. You couldn't tell me nothing. I just knew we was going to rise up, come together, and have our own everything. And, we kind of just came out of that and went back to business as usual. And I think this is that same moment in time where we have an opportunity to build, and not to sound cliche, but literally build as a collective to be able to address what we're seeing with this next administration. Because let's say they do gut it. Let's say we do not get the 5 members in 2 years. They got the Senate, they got the House of Representatives, they got the White House. Let's say they do gut it all. Then what? We still live in the apartments that we live in. We still live in the same communities. So are we now growing our own vegetables? Or are we now teaching, like going into the basements and teaching our own kids? Or are we going back to basement parties and rent parties? We're still going to do what we do as a people and show up and figure out a way to protect and then move forward. And so we have to just work as a collective. So I'm just telling everybody, whatever you do, you matter to this movement, and go to the schools, go to the PTA, the community board, whatever that community is, just show up and figure out what skill set you want to bring to the table.
I would say, and first, thank you to the organization for allowing me to be a part of this panel, this esteemed panel. Even though I'm not a member of Kappa Alpha Psi fraternity, my father is a loyal member, so he would be very happy about this panel, I'm sure. I think if I could leave anything with people, in the last 16 years, we've moved at the speed of light with our accomplishments. 16 years ago, we elected Barack Obama. 4 years ago, Kamala Harris. 2 years ago, Justice Jackson was appointed to the Supreme Court. This is a reaction to that speed. Understand that the reaction was going to come. You need to absorb the blow. To use a boxing reference, you need to absorb the blow and roll with the punches and counterpunch. There's nothing that we can't accomplish. We've proven that over the last 50 or 60 years in much dire straits than this. So one brick at a time, we'll build back. But understand that this was going to come. We just didn't understand with the force that it came with. So understand that this isn't the end. This is just a pivot. And how we pivot will affect how we're going to move forward over the next 5-10 years. Thank you.
I want to thank you all for this enlightening conversation. Thank you for leaving us with strategies and actual action steps. I want to thank the men of Kappa Alpha Psi Fraternity Incorporated for consistently having these conversations and allowing our community to not only learn but also see the greatness that we have in our communities with Dr. Hannon, with Glenn Murray, with Dr. Barnes, with Mrs. Alika Ampry Samuel. I hope that we'll see more of these conversations that lead to more coalition building, more boldness, more strategy, and more opportunities for us to see all the beauty of Black excellence that exists in our community. Everyone have a great evening, and thank you.
Brother Earl, has this been recorded?
Yes, it has.
It
And
can be transferred because a number of people
I'll
need to
send
listen.
everybody the link and everything else. So it's definitely being recorded.
Amen. Thank you. All right. Good night, all.
Good night. Thank you again.
Good night, everybody. Thank you again.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night.
Peace.
All right. Have a good one. Bye.